The Leafs ended their California road trip on a winning note and push up their lead in the Atlantic Division. We'll discuss that more here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, your daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast, hosted by myself, David Morassutti, and joining me, the next man out of the bullpen, is Austin Owens. I'm going to have to find a hockey term instead of a baseball term.
Hey, the Jays just started. MLB's in. We're all good. It rounds out now.
Yep. So we obviously are coming off a 2-game winning streak for the Leafs, who bounced back after a brutal game against the San Jose Sharks, winning against the LA Kings and the Anaheim Ducks to finish with 5 out of 6 points on the California road trip. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say the best version of the Leafs on this road trip. I feel like, it's good to get obviously good to pick up those valuable points in the standings, but I wouldn't call these 3 games as the best version of the Leafs, just because Anaheim, it was a real push and grind to the end. The Kings, they had to make the comeback, and there was questionable calls along the way there. Maybe we'll start with that one there. Austin, was it a good goal or not a good goal?
Which one? Because one
let's
of them
talk
was
about
good.
the Matthews one where he.
I mean, I feel like the one last night was less of a or more of a high stick than the one tonight, but I don't. It's the larger conversation with referees where it's kind of clear as mud. I'm sure people kind of go through this with goalie interference. It's on a case by case basis. It's kind of just whatever the referee's discretion is. That's what they're rolling with. So, I mean. You'll take it on one end because it really helped the Leafs out last night. I guess it didn't really make a big difference or not enough of a difference in the long run tonight, but a weird call for sure. I didn't think a high stick that wasn't called by a ref was able to be reviewed after the fact, but that's also just, it's a very odd play to see reviewed. It's kind of like there's one other, was it a hand pass you can't review after the fact?
Yeah, the review, we know the review thing is just one of those. You just kind of shake it. Like Elliot Freeman, I mean, God bless him. He spent his whole segment on Saturday headlines talking about goaltender interference, what is and what isn't. Yeah. We've been having this debate for far too long, and now we're going to be like, what's high stick and what's not high stick? And look, I'll say this: if it's at least the Marner one, they were quick about it. The Matthews one, that took some time to figure out, and I'm just like. You called it a no high stick on the ice. There's got to be conclusive evidence to overturn it. After a certain point, like there used to be a time where in the NFL where if you couldn't if you just couldn't figure it out, the play stood as it was called, right? Like at this rate, I get it. Every NHL team is employing a video person to review these plays, these calls on the ice, but if they can't figure it out within an extra 2 to 3 minutes of looking at it, I think you just gotta say, look, I've been looking at this. I can't see anything different from what I called earlier. We have to call this as it was on the ice. Yeah. I just feel like they gotta get back to doing that.
I'm also of the mind of I'm in that camp of like if you have to slow it down to quarter speed in order to see something, it like obviously it helps when it's the Leafs. You're kind of like, okay, that's fine, but like if you have to slow it down that much, I feel like it's kind of null and void the challenge. I know it's kind of goes against the idea of it, but yeah, I don't know. There's just certain things that irk you about the sport. It hurts when your team gets one taken off the board, but you're not complaining. Obviously, in this situation, you're on both sides of the spectrum when it comes to this call.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, both calls. One call went the Leafs' way, one didn't, and I was like, I don't think the one on Matthew Knight that nullified the Matthew Knight goal was going to be an issue in the game. The LA one, to me, that one really did sway things the Leafs way, because I don't know if the Leafs were struggling at 5-on-5 to get the offense going. So the first one benefited the Leafs. The second one obviously didn't, but the Leafs were able to overcome that in the Anaheim game. Let's talk a little bit more about the Kings game, though, because what I'll give the Leafs credit for is a lot of people were talking about the number of shots that the Leafs gave up. Obviously, the Leafs were outshot in this game, but I'll give Mike Kelly credit, because we tend to look at the shots on goal and think that that's a true indicator of where the game is going.
Yeah.
And I think and I've seen this far too often from the Leafs this year, in that the shots they get on goal tend to be more of a higher quality. The Leafs, I mean, I'm sure Craig Berube has told his team to get more pucks on net, but the Leafs have really gotten the quality of chances up, in my opinion. Like in the game against LA, the shots were 36-26. The slot shots, according to Mike Kelly, it was 17-9 for the Leafs. Obviously, the Leafs end up winning that game 3-1. I will take the Leafs getting outshot if it means that they're going to have the majority of the scoring chances. And that's where I think analytics comes really in play here, because you look at tonight's game against the Ducks, and after the game, I'm looking at natural stat trick here, and at 5-on-5, the Leafs had 13 high danger chances. The Ducks had 7. So the Leafs clearly had an advantage in the high danger chances, and they also had the advantage in expected goals in the game. So the Leafs did have the quality of chances. Obviously, I felt like at 5-on-5, it was pretty even. Where things skewed a bit towards Anaheim's favor, it wasn't a whole lot, but it was just the extra power plays that Anaheim did have at the couple of extra shots on the power play. Really, I think was kind of, and then obviously them at the end trying to get those extra shots with the net empty. So all in all, I think the process has been good for the Leafs. Maybe just not as many goals that we like to see.
Yeah, I think, shot totals can, it's kind of why, you don't completely rely, and at least I like a bit of the eye test, a bit of the, the advanced stats. It's why you kind of rely on those underlying numbers, because shots, are a bit deceiving when it comes to certain things. Are certain teams, just volleying shots on from the sideboards and the point, and just trying to put anything on and hope for a tip. They're just putting it in the blender, sort of, I think, yeah, when it comes to that, I don't think the Leafs are doing too bad for themselves. I think, they've had some scrambles the odd time in games where it's a little bit dicey, but for the most part, they're doing a pretty good job of team defense. I think, Berube's brought a lot better of a system in that regard. It just comes down to, execution. At the end of the day, the shots are what they are, right? Like, you don't want to be getting, outshot by, 10, 15, anything like that, because then it just becomes your goalie having to kind of save you in certain situations. But, I think against teams like this, especially the Ducks that are lower in the standings, the Sharks teams like that, they're just, young, trying to find experience. It's a lot of just, get it on the goal and see what happens. We have the skill, but it's just about, having those numbers to kind of put you in a chance or an opportunity to succeed. Obviously the Kings are like that too. They've been like that. It's kind of they play a heavier style, playoff kind of style. So that's a good test for, I think, the Leafs last night.
Yeah, I think it definitely was. So we'll dive a little bit more into the game here. What exactly did we like from the Leafs weekend? And we're also going to get a little bit of talking to the lineup and whether this lineup that we're seeing now, is it what we're going to see come game on the playoffs? Do we still think things might change? And we had a couple of debuts down with the Marlies, so we'll get a little look into how those new Leafs or new Marlies perform here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here. The Final Four has been determined, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and who's even going to cut down the net. You can also use it on the Leafs action here. You might have gotten a little bit of value if you put some money on Austin Matthews to score this weekend, John Tavares. Those guys have been putting pucks in the net quite frequently lately. So make sure you go and do it on the FanDuel app because it is simple to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There is no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoop action, all tournament lock here. And it is also the sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Want to welcome you back here to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti. Joining me today is my good buddy Austin Owens with Mike on vacation still. Want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Leafs podcast your first listen of the day. And if you're looking for another listen, make sure you go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast where your experts will give you all the latest around the league. It's a big time right now for Alex Ovechkin. 5 away from Wayne Gretzky. It's crazy. The Capitals have, I'm just currently looking right now, 9 games left. Ovi's got 9 games left to score 5 goals.
Yeah. Take a wager he doesn't.
Yeah, I'm thinking a good chance he does. I thought he was going to put in a couple on the Sabres today.
Yeah.
It's so weird. They lost that game like 8-5, and I'm like, he only had 1 goal.
Yeah, I don't know. That Washington team's super interesting, and I think we were talking about it beforehand too. Boston College lost in their regional tournament today, so there's going to be a lot of Ryan Leonard watch going forward, and he's an absolute stud that could probably plug into the top 6 right away.
Yeah, that's them and the Jets are the only teams with a 700 or better points percentage in the league, and the Washington Capitals are going to add an absolute stud in Ryan Leonard.
A top 10 pick, I believe he was.
Right? I think he was 8th overall. Yeah. Unbelievable. That Washington's just going to continue adding talent like that, considering what they're getting this year. The Leafs, for their weekend, what they did, obviously a big one because they are now at 94 points on the year. And James Myrtle tweeted this out after. Leafs have now the sixth best record in the league. So 6th best record in the league, on pace for 104 points. With 8 games left, he believes a 5-2-1 record over the final 8 games should be enough to lock up the division. Obviously, big games against Tampa and Florida remain on the books. Yes. But what was more important, I know a lot of people saw, and I had a few people text me, oh, the Leafs can clinch a playoff spot today. I said, yes, but you don't want the Leafs to clinch a playoff spot today. The reason is because the Montreal Canadiens would have had to have lost their game against the Florida Panthers. So I say, as much as it probably made your stomach turn to have to cheer for a Habs win in regulation, that's exactly what happened. The Habs went on to win that game against Florida 4-2. And with that, obviously helps big time for Leafs because the Florida Panthers didn't pick up any extra points. The loser points, as I like to call them. And Montreal vaults themselves back into a wild card spot. And for the Leafs, with their 2 victories on the weekend, they are now 3 points up on Florida and Tampa. Now, the Leafs do have 1 extra game played, and that sets the stage for this upcoming week. We'll get a little bit more onto the matchup with the Panthers, but this weekend brought, I think, a lot of positives for this team. Austin, if you were to look at what you liked from the weekend, what was maybe one thing you would point out that you liked?
I liked just the production across the board. I think when you look at it offensively, like I think the defense, I've liked the play of Brandon Carlo a lot. I think he's really rounded into his own, across this last little stretch since he's gotten comfortable. But, the fourth line kind of coming up with important goals. Obviously, Lorentz having the game winner in this game against the Ducks. You have the big 4 all contributing in their own ways. JT and Nylander were really good over the first 2 games of the series, and then Matthews has kind of just been a constant. He had a couple of goals over the weekend, so Marner with a big breakaway goal as well. So I just think like just up and down the board, the question is always secondary scoring and it showing up when they need it. And I think, they got the big guys to show up, but Max Domi, Scott Lawton got his first goal. I just think, a lot of different guys contributed in big ways during these games.
Yeah, I think, you saw a little bit of everything during this road trip. Brandon Carlo against the Ducks, he had 5 blocks. Leafs had 22 block shots against Anaheim. That's giving your goaltender a little bit of an easier night, although it was still, I thought Joseph Woll played really, really well tonight. I thought it was a nice bounce back from him. That was actually one of my pauses. You saw the goaltending. Like we started to hear a little bit of the goaltending starting to fall off here. I thought that was 2 quality starts there from Anthony Stolarz and Joseph Woll. Obviously, Anaheim's still a half decent team. Like they got some talent on that team, so you gotta be ready to play against them. And I thought Stolarz did very well against the Kings. He faced a lot of rubber, but he was ready for the task. But back to Carlo for a second here, because maybe even just a touch on your point. 5 blocks on the night against Anaheim. The night before, he drops the gloves. I don't know if you caught this.
Yes.
Brandon Carlo drops the glove with Jeff Malott.
Yeah.
Whose brother is a UFC fighter.
Whose brother is an absolute mutant in the UFC, Mike Malott.
So credit Carlo, because this is obviously maybe a guy who sparred with his brother once in a while. You could probably guess that just by, when you got a close family member like that. Yeah. Carlo held up his own pretty good. Carlo has just been kind of a breath of fresh air. I know that it wasn't the best of starts to his tenure in Toronto, but I think he's still done quite nicely. He's, he's blocking shots. I think he has done his best to, at least you alleviate some of that pressure off of Riley as much as you can by having someone like Carlo back there. And it takes away minutes from guys like Simon Benoit, who I don't know why he's still playing as many games as he's playing. Frankly, I thought he was better tonight, but I'd like to see Philip Myers get a game here with.
I think that's more it is. It's not so much that, Benoit, he hasn't had a great stretch, but it's also just like, again, I think I've said it a couple times on here, like this is the time you're going to be in the playoffs. This is the time to just try certain things. Obviously not in a game like this where it's the Ducks or the Sharks and they're lower down the standings. You don't want to, try anything too crazy or experimental in a game against Florida or Tampa with points on the line right now. But like, this is the time with, teams that you think you could try something out and see what happens, that, give Philip Myers a look and see what he does with, I don't know, insert defensive partner here, whoever you'd like to have there. Like just see what you have going into the playoffs. Cause you don't want to be in a situation where, Benoit, you want to take him out of the lineup and then Myers is coming in having not played for a month.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is you want to get him in a game because you don't want this guy sitting for too long. Yeah. And God forbid, knock on wood, an injury doesn't happen. But if an injury were to happen, you got to throw this guy right in there. And he's going to be like, well, I haven't played in forever. By the way, Brandon Carlo, after realizing who Jeff Malott really was and who his brother was, not at all. I didn't know who he was, but knowing that information, I'm thankful I'm not knocked out right now. So he probably would have thought twice. Would have thought twice about fight him. And big as you mentioned, the depth scoring did come through against Anaheim. Big goals for Domi. What a goal by Max Domi!
Beautiful,
unreal backhand. Got to do more of that, Max. Keep doing it. I know you want to force the puck to Scott Lawton. You could shoot the puck too.
It could not have happened that deke to a better person as well. Oh. Just David, do it with me. One of them's.
Chef's kiss. Radko Gudas.
Radko Gudas. Go pick your paraphernalia up out of the Raptors, pal.
Radko Gudas had a rough game. And as Austin says, it could not have happened to a better person.
That
Minus
is a
3.
shame, David.
-3. Mitch Marner victimized them on the breakaway. Max Domi on the ridiculous backhander, and Steven Lorentz, like, Gudas had such a hard night he couldn't even contain one Steven Lorentz, who got the game winner. Half of his goals scored this year, broadcast did a good job bringing this up. Half of his goals this year have been game-winning goals.
Yeah, it's big game performer.
Yeah, but again, that's what you need from your depth. You need depth guys that are going to be able to do this come playoff time.
Yep.
Let's just hope it does happen here. Any other final thoughts on this weekend? What you liked from this team?
I was thinking about it. Just hopping on with you here is just like I feel like a couple days ago when the San Jose lost, the sky felt like it was falling a bit. You lose to the worst team in the league twice in a shootout. Obviously not ideal, but at the same time, coming out on the other side of it, the Leafs take all but 1 point on this trip. That's, really important in the long run, because I remember the California trip when they used to go on it. It was an absolute, murderer's row of just when the Kings were going and the Ducks were still good when they had Perry and Getzlaff and all these guys. And then San Jose still had Thornton and Mart. Like, it was an absolute nightmare of a trip to come out here. So just to get points coming out on the road when you're, jet lagged and on a different time zone, I think it's, a best case scenario. Obviously you want, all 6 of the points, but you're not going to be complaining about 5 going home.
Yeah. And I think Austin Matthews responded nicely after. I think he had a bit of a rough game against San Jose. Yeah, he got on the score sheet, but I just saw a different side of him in these 2 games, especially defensively. I also just hope that at some point the minutes are going to come down for him and Marner. They've been playing a lot, and I know that these games are important, but at the same time, they've been playing a lot of minutes. It might be time to see some, especially on the penalty kill. Get Scott Lawton out on the penalty kill more. Like, get him to take some of those minutes. You traded for the guy, use him a bit more. If you're not going to really have him out there at 5-on-5, get him out there more on the penalty kill. Get some of those minutes off. I know Matthews, great on the faceoffs. We saw in this game 66%. John Tavares 73.7% on the faceoffs tonight. That's such an. I know that sometimes it gets brought up so much on the broadcast when they talk about faceoffs, but that type of dominant night on the faceoff dot, and even David Camp 57%. Like, that's huge for this team. Especially in the playoffs.
It matters, especially when you have lines like, Camp. You might not look at it, and say that's a crazy stat, but also for the fourth line, which. Not looking at the stats, I imagine a good majority of their starts were in the defensive zone. Like, that matters a lot, because it's just taking time where you're not hemmed into your own zone, where you can give your skill guys a break and hopefully hem the other team in their own end. That doesn't always happen, but the best offense is, sometimes just keeping the puck out of your own zone.
Yeah, no, I think it's, and those 2 guys are getting played a lot in the final minutes of games too. It's they're pick. That's why they also play a lot too, is because they're playing in the tougher part of the game at the end there. So good to see that continue to happen. We do have a couple things. I do have a couple things I want to discuss when it comes to the lineup, and just get a little bit of update on the new guys that joined the Leafs recently this week. Some of them made their AHL debuts, and Austin was there to see it in person. So who better to ask about how these new guys performed? We'll discuss that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'd like to welcome you back here to the Locked On Leafs podcast. David Morassutti, and joining me is my good buddy Austin Owens. The California road trip is over. The Leafs will now return home, where they will play. I'm just looking at the schedule here. 2 games at home. They don't play again till Wednesday, so they'll get 2 days off. I'm assuming Monday will be a full out nothing's going on. Get yourself a little reacquainted back to Eastern time. Oh, yeah. Then you got another day probably of practice before you host the Florida Panthers, and their end of schedule right now, every team but 2 is in a playoff spot from here on out. So the final 8 games, if I'm reading this, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, the final 8 games, you got the Panthers twice, the Lightning, the Canadians, the Blue Jackets, the Hurricanes, the Sabres, and the Red Wings. You can determine who is not in the playoffs position based on who I said there. All in all, the Leafs are going to get some big tests and some big games like that 4-game stretch. Florida, Columbus, Florida, Tampa. That 4-game stretch could be very crucial to determining how the rest, how the playoffs match up for the Leafs.
Yeah, that's a swing of a couple of points, especially when it comes to the 2 against Florida. I know, early on in the year, you kind of finished up with Tampa. Now this one's really to solidify everything because it's kind of the Leafs' misfortune that the one time they're kind of up in the standings and competing at the end of the year, this late into the year for a division title, that the other 2 teams that have division spots in the mix are 1 or 2 points behind them. So it's a cliche that they say, but every game's a playoff game going forward, and they have to treat it that way because you don't want to find yourself taking a night or 2 off and finding yourself in that 2nd or even 3rd spot if you're kind of absent-minded a couple nights down the stretch.
And out of all the divisions, the Atlantic Division is the only one where those top 3 spots remain that close. Like, yeah, in the Pacific, you got the Kings and the Oilers fighting for 2nd place, but both of those teams are 9 points back of Vegas for 1st. The Jets are up by 6 points on the Stars, who are up 7 points on the Avalanche. So a pretty sizable gap there. And then you got the Metropolitan where the Capitals are. The Capitals are 9 games. 9 points. 9 points up on the Hurricanes, who are 9 points up on the Devils. Like, I know the Metro has a really good team right now, and the Capitals, and even the Hurricanes have had a really good season with 94 points. But that might be the most uncompetitive division in the East when you look at the Metropolitan Division. How, like, even the Devils, they could sleepwalk the rest of the way to the playoffs because they have a 8-point advantage. 8-point advantage on the Rangers, which, yeah, okay, they can't completely sleepwalk, but Devils haven't been good, and yet they've kept this margin pretty good for themselves. So
if you go 500 the rest of the way, you're doing okay. You just can't fall off a cliff in the last couple of weeks in the year.
Exactly. So with that being said, I was thinking about the changes that the Leafs made over the weekend. So Nick Robertson sat against the Ducks. He was a healthy scratch. Pontus Holmberg comes back and he plays on the 4th line with Kampf and Lorentz. I thought he was pretty good, especially on that Lorentz goal. Played some heavy hockey, forecheck and get the loose puck. Eventually that ends up going into the back of the net. But what I'm really thinking about here is the Calle Jarnkrok fit on the 3rd line. And that, to me, remains, I think, the open spot in this lineup right now. I think that I'm sure Berube probably prefers to have a guy like Jarnkrok there because problem for me with Nick Robertson, as much as he has the offensive upside, he's been taking some stupid penalties. He hasn't really been that focused on both ends of the ice. He hasn't been bringing it offensively either. So he's kind of stuck again in that, no man's land of not really giving the Leafs exactly what they need in that spot. So Calle Jarnkrok is there by default, but I'm still thinking at some point, and I don't know if he will be back by the end of the regular season. I know that they're saying he likely will be projected to return come playoff time. I do think that this might be Max Pacioretty's spot. I know that might mean that there's three lefties on that line, but I think Max Pacioretty, out of all of those guys, obviously the injury aside, probably is the one that gives me the most confidence out of all the options between him, Jarnkrok, and Robertson. I think Pacioretty could be the odd man guy in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's been kind of the dialogue the last little bit. Robertson does bring offensive upside, but it's like you said, he's just not only, tough penalties to take, but just kind of bad timing, I think was more so than anything, like after a goal, something like that. It's just, it's tough. He's been kind of working his way back into the good books with Berube, I feel like, and just stuff like that is going to, put you in the doghouse pretty quick. But yeah, I know Holmberg is, a favorite of Berube's, but I think Pacioretty, a couple of people have said it already, but like if he was going he doesn't need to be a goal scorer. He's not like, he can be a goal scorer. That'd be lovely if he was, old Pacioretty in the playoffs, but just being a physical presence, he's a big body. He was laying guys out before he got injured. Like, I think that's brings the most value to your bottom six, especially in a playoff series. Once you get into the back half of the series, especially when, guys start to really lay into you and it starts to really show, the back and forth of that series. I think that's where a guy on your fourth line that just hammers any guy into the boards that he sees, finishes his checks, is really helpful. And you add into that, if you're saying, play with a Lorentz and Kampf, that he's got a good shot and could finish some goals, that's an asset in the playoffs. I think you can't have that guy sitting in the press box.
No, I don't think you can. The experience he provides, I think you add like the physical element, all those things you bring up there. It's just, to me, I trust that over what I'm seeing from a guy like Yarncroc and Robertson. At worst, Yarncroc is your fourth line winger. I just think you get more upside out of what a guy like Pacioretty can do. And worst case, if McMahon's having trouble in the top six with Nylander and Tavares, you can put him down to the third line again. And guess what? Pacioretty has played there, and he's played very well in that role. So I think that's another, strong element that he can bring, is he can step up in those minutes if he's asked. Obviously, conditioning will be something to watch for. But if you're really worried about that, and if he is close to being ready come playoff time, and if there's time left, you could send him down to the Marlies for a conditioning stint. That's still a possibility too if he is that close.
Yep.
Speaking of the Toronto Marlies, they had a pretty interesting weekend here. 2 losses. Yep. One that didn't exactly go so well with a 4-1 lead being blown. Man, do they sound like Leafs at that point. But the more important thing, and like we, at times we look at, how are they doing, in terms of their performances in the standings. But I think what needs to be also said is, how are some of the guys that are under development here, right? How are the guys that are going through your system? I think like an Alex Steves, William Villeneuve, Jacob Quillen, Topi Niemola. I know some people are wondering what's going on with him, what's going on with Roni Hirvonen. But there are a couple other guys who are now a part of the Leafs organization. They were signed this week, and some were signed a little bit earlier too. You got John Prokop.
Yep.
You had Luke Hames. I always want to say Luke Haynes. I want to go with
it's kind of a weird.
Yeah, Luke Hames, and I'm missing one. Who was
Ryan Kerwin?
Oh yeah, sorry.
He signed last night after the Bell.
Yes, game. He signed after. Yeah, he signed after the after the game.
It was announced.
Yeah, he was announced after. So, a couple guys here who made their debuts this weekend, and you were there to see it in person. Awesome. What did you think of? Let's go with Prokop first. I think he's.
Yeah. So I wasn't able to be in person, unfortunately.
Sorry, you got a close eye. You were watching the game.
I was not a traveler this week. They were in Laval to start, and they were in Belleville, and they were back home in Toronto this week. So they did a 3-3. So in the first half, nobody played. Neither of them played. The last night in Belleville, though, both of them made it in the lineup, Hames and Prokop. And I think, Prokop was very impressive, very poised with the puck. He was playing on a line with, I believe it was Tommy Miller, who's a guy the Marlies brought in on an AHL deal, I want to say. Dependable D guy, just played him there. And I think he really showed the difference between, guys coming out of junior that make the jump to the A and guys that have played against that older competition in the NCAA, especially, Union's kind of an underrated school for producing solid pros. I don't know if there's, a ton of superstar talent coming. Obviously, that ends up at BU or BC or a lot of these top programs, but Union just has good players. And Prokop, he came close to a couple goals. He was moving it very, very well on the point. I think, him walking the line, he just looked very comfortable for a guy stepping right in the middle of a 3-and-3. So I was really impressed with him. And he did really well in the defensive end. Not going into, the nuts and bolts of it, but just, gap control looked very good. He wasn't shying away from physical contact. He just kind of, for first showing, he just kind of did everything that you wanted to see out of a guy that kind of shows you that he's going to be something in the future. He's probably a guy that spends next year with the Marlies and then gets a look with the Leafs. You just give him a full year in the AHL and see what he does. And I think he could be kind of an underrated producer for the Marlies next year and to the end of this year.
Yeah, I mean that's what you're looking for. You're looking for guys who, at some point can one day be a contributor for the Leafs. And with guys like Minton and Grabankin being traded, you need to fill in some of that depth. And look, if you looked at the Sunday game with Bridgeport, Luke Hames with a pretty nice way to score your first AHL goal.
He was, from everything I read going into it, obviously I'm not the biggest college hockey watcher, but just everything that anyone that knows, about prospects coming out of the NCAA, it seemed like he was kind of a step ahead of everyone else in this class and a guy that a lot of teams wanted to sign. He is an Ottawa product. And I just watched a quick video that Elite Prospects did on him. And I if you want more info on just how he plays, I would highly suggest it, because it was kind of a 10-minute breakdown of just filming what he does well. He's just, good body type, strong on the puck on the sideboards, wins puck battles, does all the little things that you really like. And then he's a really solid skill player, and he just thinks the game really well. Same thing as Prokop in Belleville. I think he played on the fourth line with Brandon Baddock and Cedric Pare. So a couple of veteran guys. He just kind of got eased in last night, whereas I believe Prokop was second pairing, so he had a little more time on ice. But Hames was impressive, especially in last night in Belleville. It was a 1-1 going into the shootout, 2-1 win. Just kind of, dependable minutes, I think was the cool thing with him. And then he showed off his high skill in this game against Bridgeport. I didn't get to watch the game, unfortunately, but just seeing the highlight, obviously, just a quick forehand, backhand on the breakaway. I think he added an assist as well. So just a lot of people really like this kid, and a lot of people are really excited about what he could be. I think, it's too early to say he's kind of a guy that, could be a Fraser Minton, but I think he kind of projects as somebody that Leafs hope can kind of be that, a dependable third or fourth line center in the future that just eats minutes and you can depend on. I think that's obviously looking down the road. He's got to develop a little bit, but I think, a guy coming out of college, it's kind of what you're hoping for at his age.
Yeah. Well, I like about Luke Hames, he's 21.
Yes.
He's not especially when you see some of these guys who come out of junior hockey, the CHL, a lot of the guys being signed and leaving CHL like in about 2021. So he's on that nice development path where he's still young, still got lots of time to see what he has to offer. And basically, from what I saw from the coaching staff from the Marlies, a lot of similar to Jacob Quillen too.
Yes.
So I do like to see that. Leafs have got to add a little more youth to the lineup, and we'll see how that lands.
There's going to be some exciting, just before we go, I think just some exciting guys. William Villeneuve, you mentioned, has been first pairing all season. He and Dakota Murmis have been playing really well together. I think he's somebody that could challenge for a spot with the Leafs in the future. Quillen's looked really good, and I believe Steves is either leading the AHL in goals right now or is top 2 or 3 in the league. And I think he's a couple away from the Marlies single season record for goals. So he's having a really good year.
Yeah, and we saw what Steves was able to do when he was brought up with the Leafs. So if they need someone, I can imagine Alex Steves will be one of the first calls that the Leafs will make should it arrive to that. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Austin, for joining us. Thank you for filling in for me today, for Mike today, and want to thank you all for listening and supporting the Locked On Leafs podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Make sure you tell all your friends. We're trying to continue that push to 10K subscribers. We are well over I gotta get the proper 6,144. Yeah, nice. I knew it was we added a couple of the last few days. So 6,144. So we're just under 4,000 subs away from 10K. We really want to get to that mark as our next goal here. So make sure you tell all of your friends. And thank you all for making Locked On Leafs your first listen of the day. On the next episode, we will continue to kind of look forward at the playoff picture and just maybe some areas. Maybe we'll have to do a mailbag at some point too, because at least we have an off day. So maybe we'll look to do a mailbag for Tuesday's episode, considering that will be a day off. So make sure you keep an eye on our YouTube channel. Also, make sure you go and subscribe to us on Instagram. I'll throw some options for you guys to add some questions there as well. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.